There's something unsettling about realizing that the greatest forces in history may not be found in the records we read, but rather in the silences that no one dares to explain. In every civilization, behind the monuments, the thrones, and the revolutions, there were unseen hands shaping events, ideas taking root without ever being written down. The world, as well documented as it may seem, is filled with areas of silence, and it is in these spaces that true power often hides. What happens when a society, an order, or an entire legacy chooses to leave no trace? What remains when everything that could tell its story is deliberately erased? This is the challenge that sets our journey in motion. What if the most influential orders were precisely those that never wished to be remembered? The enigma begins with a paradox, the invisible that transforms the visible. History records kings, wars, treaties, and conquests, but rarely asks who influenced the decisions behind these events. There exists a hidden architecture operating behind the scenes of humanity, like a shadow pulling the strings of fate. This silent force, often referred to as the invisible order, doesn't require names, dates, or monuments in its honor. It endures not in spite of the silence, but because of it. Instead of seeking glory or immortality, it prefers continuity through generations that merely whisper its secrets to the wind. Why would a society choose to remain forgotten? Because there's a power that cannot be contained when it cannot be named. Writing is an act of exposure. Recording is handing over the key to the mystery of human fragility. Once something is written down, it can be misinterpreted, distorted, destroyed, or even ridiculed. What remains only in oral tradition, in direct experience, and in the resonance of symbols escapes the confines of words. Silence becomes the most refined form of protection. By leaving no traces, these orders ensure that only those truly prepared, those who resonate on the same frequency, can touch them, grasp their essence, and keep their presence alive. Societies that leave no records are not a historical accident. They are a deliberate choice. It's an intentional act of concealment, a way to preserve the sacred against the inevitable desecration of time. Unlike institutions that accumulate archives and strive to immortalize their achievements, these orders move in the opposite direction. They erase traces, encode symbols, and dissolve names. Their goal isn't to be remembered, but to be eternal, and there's a profound difference between the two. What is remembered can be forgotten, while what is eternal exists even in oblivion. These orders don't operate like modern secret clubs or mystical organizations engaged in symbolic theatrics. They are vibrant and organic, and often don't even see themselves as societies. Instead, they represent shared states of consciousness, maintained by individuals who may not even recognize one another, yet adhere to the same principles, guided by a common source. It's not about hiding knowledge, but rather safeguarding it from misuse. This protection stems from the absence of evidence. When there's nothing to attack, destroy, or accuse, what remains is untouchable. This is how the invisible endures through time. What keeps these orders alive is their loyalty to purpose, not form. While religions, empires, and ideologies crumble under the weight of their own structures, these orders flow like water between the stones. They change names, faces, clothing, and languages, but they keep the flame alive. They don't rely on institutions, but on principles. They are sustained not by dogmas, but by practices, and their initiates are recognized not by titles, but by their vibrations. This strategic invisibility is what shields them from being forgotten and from persecution. The story is filled with signs of their influence, even when no names are mentioned. A ruler who suddenly changes course, a civilization that flourishes without explanation, a scientist who has a groundbreaking insight, a spiritual leader who emerges with timeless wisdom. These are echoes of the silent touch of these orders. They don't operate with fanfare or publicity. Instead, they act like invisible gardeners, planting seeds that only sprout in fertile soil and at the right moment. They are in no rush, for they understand they are working with the eternal. The absence of records doesn't equate to a lack of presence. On the contrary, what often goes undocumented is what runs the deepest. These orders exist in intersubjectivity, in the enduring myths, in the symbols that traverse continents without explanation. They communicate through intuition, dreams, and premonitions. They reveal themselves to those who can read between the lines of the world. They are like the wind, invisible, yet felt. And when they touch, they transform everything without leaving a trace. At the heart of these orders lies the understanding that mystery is a language, and not just anyone can grasp it. Instead of offering explanations, they invite experiences. Rather than teaching with words, they awaken through vibrations. Instead of persuading, they embrace silence. The true initiate is one who has learned to listen to what remains unsaid, to see what is hidden, and to trust what cannot be proven. It is this mastery of the unseen that sets apart the orders that have left no trace. While civilizations strive for immortality through stones and scrolls, these orders have discovered a more subtle form of permanence, inner transformation. They exist not in collective memory, but in the awakened soul of every individual touched by their hidden presence. They are invisible not out of fear, but out of wisdom, for they understand that what is overly visible becomes vulnerable, while that which remains sufficiently unseen becomes invincible. The greatest mystery of these orders is that, even without leaving traces, we can still feel their presence. Something within us recognizes this ancient essence, this wisdom that doesn't come from books, but from deep within. It's as if a part of us already knows, as if we've lived it before, as if we've been a part of it. Perhaps that's the ultimate secret. These invisible orders aren't just external societies. They are expressions of a consciousness that resides within each of us. When we quietly awaken, we become a part of them. No rituals, no names, no records, just the silent certainty that something eternal is guiding us. Long before the invention of writing, humanity was already sharing knowledge, beliefs, secrets, and guidance. They did so through a technology that transcends paper, ink, and parchment, the living word. In many parts of the world, the most sacred knowledge was passed down from mouth to ear, among initiates who were prepared to safeguard not just the content, but the essence of what they heard. Oral tradition was not merely a way to keep history alive. It was, above all, a spiritual filter. Only those whose hearts, minds, and energies were in harmony with the teachings could truly receive, understand, and carry them forward. There was no room for the curious or opportunistic. Knowledge flowed only through vibrational merit. This made these oral traditions remarkably resilient against the passage of time, forgetfulness, and external threats. This choice of orality was also a choice for freedom. Nothing confined its teachings to a specific place, object, or temple. Knowledge was portable. It traveled with people, crossing deserts, forests, and oceans through the voices of its bearers. A single individual could carry entire generations of teachings, symbols, stories, and spiritual maps in their memory. And even if that person faced persecution, exile, or silencing, the legacy lived on in others, scattered like invisible seeds in a field too vast to be controlled. Orality was the invisible body of wisdom. It couldn't be burned like books or destroyed like libraries. That's why so many traditions embraced it, not just out of necessity, but out of wisdom. In indigenous, African, Aboriginal, and Eastern cultures, we find vivid examples of preservation through storytelling. These were peoples who didn't write, yet they knew. They didn't archive their knowledge, but they remembered. They didn't sign documents, but they told stories with remarkable precision, passed down from generation to generation, each one carefully preserving not just the facts, but the spirit behind them. Often the secret lay not in what was said, but in how it was said. The tone of voice, the right pause, the gaze during the narration, all of this formed a subtle code that was impossible to transcribe. It is precisely this symbolic complexity that prevented outsiders from grasping the true meaning of the teachings. By avoiding written records, these teachings prevented their knowledge from being taken out of context, commercialized, or distorted by those unprepared for it. Oral tradition thus served as a shield against trivialization. Knowledge couldn't simply be stolen. One had to be present, gain acceptance, undergo internal trials, earn the master's trust, and above all, prove oneself worthy in silence. A disciple wasn't merely someone who memorized, they were someone who embodied the teachings. This transformed each lesson into a living form of inner alchemy rather than just an intellectual concept. These teachings also conveyed that the true power of words lies not in their permanence, but in their resonance. Writing is static, while speaking is dynamic. It carries the warmth of emotion, the pulse of the moment, and the energy of intention. Each time a lesson was spoken, it was revitalized. It gained new life, new rhythm, and new strength, shaped by the spiritual atmosphere of the occasion. This is why the same myth could have slight variations without ever losing its essence. What mattered was not literal fidelity, but vibrational fidelity. And this kind of fidelity can only be achieved when the heart and mind are aligned with the source of knowledge. In oral tradition, there exists a profound sense of responsibility. The guardian of knowledge is not merely a transmitter, but a transformer. They must keep the flame alive without burning down the temple. They need to translate without distorting the essence. It requires a constant listening, both to the visible world and the unseen. When a tradition chooses to preserve its wisdom in this way, it expresses a greater trust in the awareness of the initiate than in any external form. It asserts that knowledge does not belong to an institution, but rather to the intimate relationship between teacher and student, between the mystery and the seeker. Many of these orders utilized songs, stories, proverbs, dances, and rituals as a way to encode their knowledge. The song was not merely music, it was a sacred formula. The story was not just a narrative, it was a reflection of the soul. The proverb held layers of wisdom that unfolded with the listener's inner growth. Together, all of this created a rich, multisensory language that was deep and impossible to replicate by those who had not experienced the essence behind the form. In this way, the orders became invulnerable to intellectual theft, as their true essence could only be revealed through direct experience and inner silence. There was also a spiritual element to this choice, the awareness that certain knowledge cannot be captured in writing without losing its essence. Some forms of understanding, when put down on paper, lose their spirit. They become frozen, they wither, they turn into mere words. In contrast, spoken words carry the breath of life, the essence of the spirit. They are alive, vibrant, and transformative. This is what the invisible orders have always preserved. Knowledge as a living experience, not as stored data, because knowledge that doesn't touch the soul doesn't transform. And knowledge that doesn't transform isn't wisdom, it's just information. By choosing orality, these orders also practiced a form of cosmic humility. They recognized that absolute knowledge cannot be captured by any human language. Every record is a reduction, a simplification. The mystery is greater than any word, therefore they preferred to let it flow in subtle vibrations, in eloquent silences, and in direct experiences. They did not seek to confine the infinite within the finite bounds of words. Instead, they aimed to create space for the infinite to be felt, even if it couldn't be explained. There are orders that still exist today in this very form, without a headquarters, without a temple, without a book, and without a name. Their members don't identify themselves through emblems, but through a shared energy. They connect through synchronicity. They exchange knowledge through glances, gestures, dreams, and silences. They have the power to transform lives, societies, and consciousness without ever being seen. They exist on the fringes, in the invisible, in the intangible. Yet their influence is more tangible than that of many established institutions. Oral tradition is more than just a means of passing down knowledge. It's a philosophy of existence. It asserts that true understanding cannot be separated from being. Wisdom isn't something you own, it's something you embody. The most precious secrets aren't those locked away in vaults, but those that can only be unveiled through inner transformation. The unseen forces are aware of this, which is why they continue to whisper secrets in the winds. They know that one day, someone will listen and truly understand. When history fails to record names, dates, or authors, we are left with stones. They endure the rust of memory, the flames of war, and the collapse of empires. Across many parts of the world, we encounter monuments whose origins remain shrouded in mystery, as if they had emerged not from human hands, but from consciousnesses that chose to express themselves without a signature. These structures defy time, conventional logic, and the linearity of human progress, and perhaps most astonishingly, many of them share geometric, symbolic, and spiritual codes, even though they are separated by thousands of miles, and there is no record of contact between the civilizations that built them. What does this tell us? That there was an invisible network, a silent knowledge, a faceless order guiding these creations, an order that left its marks not in texts, but in stone. The language of these structures is sacred geometry. It's a silent yet profoundly eloquent language that conveys balance, harmony, and universal principles. The proportions of the pyramids, the astronomical alignments of temples, the megalithic circles, and the recurring patterns found across different continents all point to an intelligence that operated beyond local cultures, transcending regional traditions and expressing something cosmic. This geometry was not merely decorative, it was functional, vibrational, and transformative. Those who mastered it understood that form influences consciousness, and that space can be shaped to open inner portals. By constructing in this way, they left behind a signature, not of names, but of frequencies, a signature that endures through the millennia. The temples and monuments of these invisible orders were not merely buildings, they were living organisms. Every stone laid adhered to a principle, each angle reflected a wisdom, and every proportion was connected to the macrocosm. These structures served as three-dimensional maps of the universe, mirrors of the soul, and instruments of silent initiation. There were no explanatory plaques or user manuals. The seeker had to feel. They needed to be present, to resonate with the space, and to decipher through their body what the mind could not grasp. This is why many of these sites still evoke altered states of consciousness today, even in visitors unaware of their origins. The wisdom remains active, embedded in the very material itself. This choice to engrave knowledge in stone rather than in written words is a form of eternity. Words fade, scrolls disintegrate, and books can be lost. But stone endures. When shaped with intention, it speaks even in silence. There's a wisdom in rock that remains unyielding to time. That's why these orders chose stone as their medium. They understood that the future would forget everything, except for what stands before our eyes, sparking questions and igniting the quest for understanding. And so, without ever revealing their name, they continue to teach. One of the great mysteries of archaeology is the striking similarities between structures built by cultures that were supposedly disconnected. Pyramids in Egypt, Mexico, and China. Stone circles in Europe, Africa, and Oceania. Underground temples, intricate hydraulic systems, and techniques for fitting stones with millimeter precision. How did peoples separated by oceans and millennia arrive at the same solutions? The traditional explanations falter, yet there is an invisible thread that connects these achievements, a wisdom that spread without leaving written records, but can be felt in the very work itself. This wisdom is the legacy of orders that chose to remain unseen. The architects of the invisible understood that space serves as a tool for spiritual expansion. They built not just to shelter bodies, but to transform souls. The openings of the temples aligned with the solstices, the corridors designed to create specific sound resonances, the altars positioned according to the constellations. All of this is part of a greater design. There is no coincidence. Every detail conveys a message. This is a form of communication that transcends language, speaking to the unconscious and activating internal codes. Anyone who enters such a temple emerges changed, even if they don't know why. There are also the unresolved mysteries surrounding the construction techniques used. How did civilizations without modern tools move and fit massive stones with absolute precision? How did they cut incredibly hard rocks with such accuracy? These questions remain unanswered, but perhaps the answer lies within the questions themselves. These were not conventional civilizations. These works didn't emerge from a mere accumulation of techniques, but from a consciousness that interacted with materials in a different way. There's no need to resort to fanciful theories. We simply need to accept that there were orders that possessed knowledge now forgotten, and that they chose not to document it, but to demonstrate it quietly. Some of these orders might not even be recognized as secret societies, but rather as guardians of universal knowledge. Their members were less focused on leaving personal legacies and more dedicated to maintaining a vibrational field. By constructing monuments that still baffle us today, they anchored this field into the very earth. Each structure acts like an antenna, a programmed crystal, a capsule of wisdom that continues to emit its frequency for those who know how to listen. The lack of names, signatures, or identities isn't a flaw, it's a form of protection. Anonymity serves as the shield of the sacred. In some cases, the very destruction of written records of these orders was intentional. They understood that sooner or later, the world would fall prey to ambition, destruction, and distortion. So, they chose to erase their visible traces and leave behind only their works. Because true art speaks for itself, and when the time is right, the sincere seeker will know how to find not just the structure, but the key it holds. In this sense, the stone serves as both the vault and the message, and the awakened heart is the only password. The monuments left by these orders don't seek worship or explanations. They call for presence, they ask for silence. They invite contemplation, inner listening, and communion with the mystery. Each one carries an embedded question, a riddle that can only be unraveled through experience. This stands in stark contrast to writing. Writing aims to explain. Sacred architecture, on the other hand, suggests. It doesn't provide truths, but rather provokes a state of inquiry. And that quest, in itself, is the true lesson. Thus, the trace of these orders remains visible, even if it is not fully understood. It stands before us, not in books, but in stones that have withstood the test of millennia. Perhaps this is the highest form of wisdom, one that manifests without relying on rational understanding. It transforms without the need for persuasion. It endures even when everything else fades away. Because truth doesn't need to be proven, it simply exists. And that's what these stones whisper to us. The presence of something eternal, invisible, yet undeniably real. When silence is mentioned, many think of absence, emptiness, or passivity. However, for certain invisible orders, silence was anything but absence. It served as a tool, armor, language, and territory. The vow of silence, practiced by various spiritual and initiatory lineages throughout the centuries, was not merely a ceremonial requirement. It was a declaration of inner freedom and external protection. In a world where words can be wielded as weapons, silence becomes a shield. In an era when truths are twisted for convenience, silence embodies loyalty. The silence of these orders was not born of fear. It was a conscious choice. A deliberate decision to keep the sacred away from the prying eyes of the mundane, to safeguard the mystery of the world's consumption, and to endure against everything that seeks to name and control. Ancient orders understood that the power of a secret lies in its inviolability. It wasn't about hiding out of arrogance or elitism, but rather about safeguarding something sacred. The secret wasn't merely hidden information, it was an experience that could only be lived, never explained. How can one articulate something that transforms the soul, completely reorders one's being, and shatters the confines of ordinary thought? Attempting to verbalize the ineffable would only corrupt its essence. Thus, silence was not just a protective gesture for knowledge, but for the initiate themselves. By keeping silent, they also preserved their spiritual integrity and their direct connection to the source of wisdom. For centuries, these orders have endured under the shadow of religious persecution, the systematic destruction of alternative forms of wisdom, inquisitorial burnings, and erasure campaigns led by political powers. The strategy was clear: the less they left behind, the harder it would be for their enemies to find them. Many records that once existed were burned, hidden, or destroyed by the initiates themselves when they realized the world was no longer ready for that light. In those moments, silence became the last temple, a temple invisible yet indestructible, a sacred space where wisdom could hibernate, waiting for a new time to bloom. Knowledge was passed within these orders in a direct, personal, and non-transferable manner. There were no schools or public study centers. Instead, there were gatherings, subtle moments where wisdom was shared not just through words, but through gestures, glances, breaths, and shared experiences. The initiate had to be fully present in every sense. This knowledge was alive, unrepeatable, and unrecordable. As a result, it left no traces, only imprints on the soul of the recipient. These imprints transformed and reconfigured one's perception of the world, awakening a new way of being. The absence of documentary evidence for these orders isn't a flaw, it's brilliance. What isn't recorded can't be manipulated. What isn't named can't be profaned. What isn't identified can't be attacked. Silence was the veil that allowed the passage of centuries without interruption. Even during humanity's darkest times, when everything seemed lost, this knowledge persisted in the folds of the world. In deserts, in mountains, in caves, within the quiet lives of anonymous individuals who knew and never spoke, because they understood that to speak would mean destruction. The true orders of silence have no visible leaders, do not engage in proselytizing, and do not seek followers. They do not aspire to be large or numerous. They desire nothing that can be measured by external standards. Their sole purpose is to keep a flame alive, one that must be shielded from the winds of ignorance and the fires of greed. Each initiate is a candle that carries this flame with care, and for this reason, they remain silent. They understand that in a world that is asleep, sound can be more harmful than silence. In many of these traditions, time is measured not in years, but in transformations. The transmission of knowledge doesn't follow schedules. It adheres to cycles of inner maturity. A lesson is only shared when the disciple shows, through their energy, that they are ready to receive it. Once imparted, it is never discussed outside the sacred space of the master-disciple relationship. This creates a protective network that prevents any fragmentation or trivialization of wisdom. Each link in the chain knows only what their consciousness can handle, and that is enough. There is no rush. The soul's timing is different from the world's. Silence is also a language. A deep, sophisticated language that requires a refined ear to truly understand. Within the realms of silence, so much is communicated without a single word being spoken. A gesture can carry generations of wisdom. A symbol can encapsulate an entire philosophical system. A ritual can evoke states of consciousness that entire books could never achieve. This subtle communication is what ensures the longevity of knowledge. It relies on presence, resonance, and the vibrational quality of the moment, and this cannot be replicated through artificial means. That's why these orders haven't disappeared. They've simply become unseen. And that's the beauty of the invisible. It doesn't require the world's attention to exist. It simply is. It continues to exist even when the world fails to acknowledge it. In fact, it's precisely because it goes unrecognized that it remains pure. It is free from vanity, exposure, and competition. It is safeguarded by silence. And silence, far from being passive, is pure strength. It is untapped potential. It is a presence that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The lineage of these invisible orders isn't made up of names, but of vibrations. It's a thread of consciousness that weaves through the centuries, jumping from soul to soul, never getting tied to fixed forms. With each generation, there are those who feel this silent call. They don't know where it comes from or why they feel it, but they know something profound stirs within them. And when they meet others with the same fire in their eyes and the same stillness in their hearts, they recognize each other. No words are needed, because what is true doesn't require explanations. It simply needs to be lived. In the end, the best-kept secret of these orders is this: they live on within us, in every quiet act of wisdom, in each choice made with awareness, in every rejection of the ego's spectacle, and in every silence that holds the truth. They don't rely on documents to exist. They depend solely on hearts that are ready to listen to what cannot be spoken. Because silence is not an absence. Silence is an undeniable presence. During the so-called Age of Enlightenment, reason became the new altar of Western civilization. Science took the place of myths, logic dispelled mysteries, and the light of intellect spread like a triumphant torch over the darkness of the unknown. It was a time of extraordinary social, political, and philosophical transformation. However, beneath this reason-lit surface, a new kind of shadow began to emerge. Not the shadow of ignorance, but the shadow of the invisible adapting to survive. Many orders that once thrived in the spiritual twilight of the world were forced to reinvent themselves. They could no longer express themselves as they once did, nor could they hide as they had before. They needed to don new masks, speak new languages, and adopt camouflaged forms to protect their roots. What seemed like extinction was, in fact, a transfiguration, a strategic metamorphosis that preserved essence while altering appearance. With the rise of rationalism, any knowledge that didn't fit the criteria of empirical observation and objective proof was cast aside. The mystical, the symbolic, and the inner sacred were ridiculed, persecuted, or marginalized. The invisible orders understood that a direct confrontation would be disastrous. Their strategy was clear: to become invisible once more, but in a more sophisticated way. They needed to infiltrate the new paradigm, hiding within the interstices of science, art, politics, and philosophy. Thus, they began to encode their teachings in literary works, allegorical paintings, and philosophical treatises disguised as rational discourse. Behind the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, echoes of ancient veiled principles lingered. In the light of this new world, the invisible cast its shadow, subtle yet ever-present. Many members of these orders began to take on prominent roles in the emerging structures. They became advisors, scientists, inventors, artists, and statesmen. However, their aim was not to seek fame. Their actions had a different purpose: to sow the fields of reason with seeds of the sacred, disguised as revolutionary, progressive, or humanistic ideas. Concepts like freedom, equality, human rights, and respect for the dignity of the soul, though cloaked in secular language, carried within them fragments of ancient wisdom. It was the light of the spirit, masked as reason, moving slowly yet profoundly through a world that prided itself on having surpassed it. These orders knew how to transform invisibility into art. They mastered the use of symbols within the concrete, the hidden amidst the visible. They employed allegories, metaphors, and sacred architecture disguised as modern functionality. In churches, palaces, and monuments built during the modern era, there are inscriptions, numbers, angles, proportions, and figures that, for the attentive observer, reveal more than mere decoration. These are silent messages meant for those who have eyes to see. The rational appearance of the 18th century often served as the perfect cover for books whose words were not inscribed on pages, but rather etched into columns, stained glass, and meticulously designed mathematical proportions. Alchemy, once a spiritual science dismissed by modern scientific paradigms, has found ways to endure through hermetic symbolism in the arts and literature. The alchemical process has been depicted in literary characters, opera scripts, and musical compositions. Composers like Bach and Mozart wove deep symbolic structures into their works, aligning them with golden ratios, numerological cycles, and initiatory themes. Sound became a vehicle for the unseen, the score transformed into a new grimoire, and the symphony emerged as a kind of coded ritual for the awakened soul. The political revolutions that shook the modern world were, to some extent, influenced by unseen forces. Not in a conspiratorial sense, but as philosophical seeds sown centuries ago, blossoming at just the right moment. The ideals that inspired masses to challenge kings and dogmas had deep roots, tied to teachings that had been quietly safeguarded. Invisible orders acted as the gardeners of time, understanding that the harvest of freedom would only come after the planting of awareness. Many of the influential figures in these revolutions had direct or indirect connections to lines of thought that were passed down orally, symbolically, and energetically, never requiring public acknowledgement. Even amidst the rise of new scientific academies, there emerged figures who, while speaking the language of reason, were deeply attuned to the unseen. Scientists who intuited discoveries before they had evidence, thinkers who viewed the cosmos as a dance of invisible forces, mathematicians who recognized the harmony hidden within chaos. All of these individuals were touched in some way by orders that sought no glory. These orders understood that the timing of truth does not align with the timing of the world. They knew how to wait. They knew how to act in the invisible realm. They knew when to vanish when necessary. This strategy of silent survival has endured through the 19th century and remains with us today. Invisible orders have never ceased to exist. They have simply transformed in form, language, and appearance. They realized that fighting against the new world was futile. Instead, they needed to dance with it, without losing themselves in the process. They became flexible, adaptable, and ever-changing. And that's precisely why they continue to thrive. They don't cling to fixed forms, but embrace the eternal principle that resonates behind every shape. Invisibility has evolved from merely being a defense to becoming the very essence of the journey. To remain unseen in order to perceive everything. To go unnamed so as to touch the unnameable. The true strength of these orders in the modern world lies not in their hierarchical structure, but in their ability to subtly awaken consciousness. A book read at just the right moment, a symbol discovered in a dream, an encounter that seems purely coincidental, an inner impulse that alters the course of a life. All of these are ways the invisible operates. They don't need to be acknowledged, they simply need to resonate. Once touched, the individual embarks on their own journey of transformation. There's no recruitment, no manual, just an inner calling. And those who listen, respond. In an increasingly information-saturated world, true wisdom has once again retreated into the shadows. Not out of fear, but out of discernment. Superficiality has become a new kind of darkness. In this landscape, silence and symbolism emerge as allies once more. The unseen forces understand that the realm of the visible is overwhelmed. Therefore, they continue to operate in the invisible, not as a form of resistance, but as preparation. They seek not recognition, but awakening. And while the world clamors for attention, they persist in whispering wisdom to those who have learned to listen beyond the noise. The light of the Age of Enlightenment, no matter how powerful, did not extinguish the flame of mystery. It merely pushed it back into the folds of consciousness. And there, in the fertile shadows of the unseen, ancient orders remain alive, not as organizations, but as frequencies, not as structures, but as vibrations. And when the weary world, tired of artificial light, seeks its inner illumination once more, they will be there, just as they always have been, invisible, silent, eternal. On the surface of history, we encounter names, dates, and events that fill books, museums, and speeches. These are the visible faces of the decisions that have shaped our world. Kings, popes, presidents, generals, philosophers, scientists, and revolutionaries take center stage in the grand theater of humanity. Yet few dare to explore the forces operating behind the scenes. Hardly anyone asks who influenced these prominent figures in silence, in the shadows, in the backstage where the spotlight of fame doesn't reach. It is in this underground of history that invisible orders have left their most significant legacies. They didn't raise flags, etch their names in marble, or claim glory, but they were there, sowing ideas, shaping consciousness, guiding decisions that would alter the course of entire nations. A legacy without a face, yet undeniably present. These influences often came in the form of anonymous advisors, silent mentors, spiritual guides, or even seemingly chance encounters that carried the weight of a turning point in destiny. Behind decisive rulers like Solomon, Akhenaten, Constantine, and Charlemagne, there are accounts and symbolic records of mysterious figures, advisors who operated outside the official power structure, yet profoundly impacted strategic, spiritual, and social decisions. These men and women sought no recognition, for they understood that true power lies not in visible command, but in the ability to whisper an idea into the right ear at just the right moment, with the right resonance. The invisible orders understood that genuine influence doesn't require visibility. On the contrary, it thrives in the shadows. They shaped individuals who could navigate among the world's powerful without succumbing to corruption, who could plant revolutionary ideas without needing to sign their names, and who upheld lofty principles without ever speaking about them in public squares. This was the strategy of mastery, to shape the present so that the future could flourish. With no rush and no ambition, they moved with the calm assurance of those who know that the unseen, when properly aligned, can sway empires. In forgotten documents and ancient biographies, clues begin to emerge. Philosophers referencing unnamed masters, scientists drawing inspiration from enigmatic sources, strategists recounting unexpected advice from eccentric figures who soon vanished from the scene. There are recurring patterns suggesting the influence of invisible orders shaping geopolitical decisions, spiritual reforms, scientific innovations, and social movements that may appear spontaneous but are actually linked to hidden lineages of knowledge. These movements, while leaving no direct traces, embody the principles of these orders: inner freedom, connection to the divine, reverence for mystery, and a holistic vision of the cosmos and humanity. Some of these influences were crucial during moments of planetary transition. For instance, during the shift from feudalism to the Renaissance, philosophical and artistic schools emerged that were deeply rooted in esoteric traditions preserved for centuries. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, architects like Brunelleschi, and thinkers like Giordano Bruno all had direct or indirect contact with streams of thought that had been nurtured away from the watchful eyes of the Inquisition. These movements weren't seeking fame. They aimed to ensure that the light of consciousness wouldn't be extinguished by the tyranny of ignorance. And they succeeded, weaving the fabric of history with invisible threads. In the foundation of modern nations, these influences can also be detected. The independence of the United States, for instance, involved figures connected to discrete fraternities that held a vision of humanity as free, sovereign beings endowed with natural rights. While these ideas may seem commonplace today, they were quite subversive at the time. They were introduced not only for political reasons, but also through philosophical and spiritual impulses that were cultivated in secrecy. Invisible orders played a role in this ideological framework, providing the architects of the New World Order with symbolic codes, rituals, and concepts that would support a new form of social organization. These influences extended far beyond politics. In medicine, physics, psychology, botany, and astronomy, traces of these orders can be found everywhere. Researchers who dreamed of answers and woke up with formulas. Curators who employed ancient methods disguised as modern science. Educators who shaped the future without ever revealing the source of their insights. In every field of human knowledge, the presence of these orders is evident not through titles, but in the kinds of questions they raise, the truths they evoke, and the consciousness they ignite. They operate at the root level, not merely addressing the symptoms, and because of this, they transform everything without needing to be seen. In times of crisis, these orders took on even more subtle forms. They sent emissaries to act as mere advisors, seemingly disconnected from power but with access to the heart of decision-making. They planted concepts, unveiled visions, and stirred doubts that sparked silent revolutions. A gesture, a phrase, a veiled suggestion. These were enough to change the course of a policy, an empire, or even a civilization. They understood that the world doesn't change solely through decrees and armies. It transforms through ideas. And an idea imbued with quiet truth wields more power than 1,000 swords held by kings. The work of these orders has never been about domination. It has always been about awakening. They didn't aim to manipulate leaders. Instead, they sought to help them see beyond the surface. Their goal wasn't to control the world's destinies, but to ensure that the world remained connected to the unseen. They acted as silent compasses, guiding those willing to listen with their hearts. And even though their advice was often overlooked, the presence of these orders left an imprint. Invisible yet profound marks that spanned generations, continuing to influence quietly, waiting for the right moment to bear fruit. The legacy of these orders lies in the values that withstand decay, in the wisdom that endures even when everything around it crumbles, in the courage to safeguard what truly matters, even when the whole world cheers for the superficial. They have been, and continue to be, the invisible ground where the ideas that genuinely matter are nurtured, and they do this without applause, without plaques of honor, and without statues. Their greatest trophy is witnessing human consciousness inch forward beyond ignorance. Their greatest triumph is seeing a soul awaken to its own truth. Thus, the significant moments in history weren't solely shaped by heroes. They were also the result of seeds sown in silence. They emerged from ideas whispered into attentive ears, from vibrations that spread unnoticed, and from presences that may have escaped the eye but not the spirit. The impact of invisible forces on the world's major decisions isn't measured by documents, but by the transformations they inspire. And wherever true, profound, and lasting change occurs, there is always the trace of something that worked unseen, yet left an indelible mark on the fabric of time. There are moments in life when something passes through us, silently, like a breeze that no one else feels, like a whisper that seems to come from within but resonates like an ancient voice. In those instances, we are filled with an inexplicable sense of purpose, urgency, and direction. It's as if an ancient presence is beckoning us towards something greater, something that defies logic and the usual paths we tread. This is the call of the unseen. It doesn't present itself with words or explicit invitations. Instead, it reveals itself through synchronicities, enlightening dreams, unexpected encounters, and subtle signs that shift us away from our everyday reality. Once we are touched by this call, we are never the same again. A spark ignites, and the quest begins, not for something external, but for a source that pulses within us, waiting to be recognized. Throughout history, countless accounts have confirmed this pattern. People, at critical moments in their lives, have encountered mysterious individuals who appeared for just a fleeting moment, shared something profoundly significant, and then vanished without a trace. Others have experienced dreams so vivid and rich in symbolism that they felt compelled to change the course of their lives. There are also those who, during retreats, crises, illnesses, or near-death experiences, sensed the unmistakable presence of a loving, subtle, and silent intelligence that didn't save them directly but awakened them instead. There were no names, no doctrines, no temples, just an intimate certainty that they had been touched by something greater. This is how invisible orders continue to operate, through vibration, not organization, through inner calling, not external recruitment. These manifestations aren't theatrical performances. They don't involve grand spectacles or loud miracles. They emerge from the depths of our being, at the moment when the heart opens to the unseen. When the ego quiets down, the spirit begins to listen. In that space of listening, what is formless can finally be felt. The invisible order doesn't seek to impress. It aims to awaken. That's why it reveals itself in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, yet is profoundly transformative. A symbol stumbled upon by chance, a book that appears just when you need it, a seemingly random encounter. These are all ways the invisible operates, whispering its call into the ears of the soul. The call of the unseen is not just to guide us, but to remind us. It awakens a memory within us that we didn't even know we had. Something resonates deeply, as if we've known this path all along, as if we've been on it for a long time but simply forgot. It's a reconnection with a spiritual lineage that doesn't belong to any one religion, yet resonates within all of them. It's the recognition of a wisdom that isn't found in books, but pulses through our cells, our emotions, our intuition. It's the moment we realize that the search was never for something external, but rather for a realignment with an inner truth that has always been there, quietly waiting for us to listen. Many people feel this calling without being able to name it. They go on with their lives, but a growing restlessness lingers. Nothing seems to satisfy them anymore. Old ambitions lose their shine. Certainties begin to fade away, and a fertile emptiness starts to fill the space of their daily routines. This emptiness is an invitation. It's a sign that something within us is ready to emerge. Invisible forces operate at this precise moment, when the soul begins to stir, when the heart yearns for something deeper. They don't come with answers, but with keys. Symbolic keys, subtle experiences, intuitions that must be deciphered with sensitivity and courage. And it's in this deciphering that true initiation begins. It's not uncommon for those touched by this calling to radically change their lifestyles. Some leave promising careers behind, others break away from long-standing family patterns, and some travel to unknown places without any rational explanation. The change comes not from the outside, but from within. It's as if an internal compass suddenly points clearly toward a previously hidden direction. And even without knowing the destination, there's a certainty in the journey. This happens because the call of the unseen is not a command, but an invitation. It doesn't impose, but rather attracts. Those who listen feel drawn not by fear, but by love. A love that has no face, yet is undeniably present. A love that transcends any human affection because it springs from a communion with something eternal. The influence of these orders today no longer relies on temples or hierarchies. They manifest through subtle networks of consciousness, in spontaneous gatherings of seekers, and in movements that emerge simultaneously across different parts of the world without any formal connection. It's as if a silent intelligence is activating specific points on the planet and within the human psyche, creating a new vibrational fabric. In this network, each awakened individual becomes a node of light, an emissary of the unseen, a channel through which wisdom can flow. There's no need for titles, uniforms, or elaborate rituals. The true right is living life with presence, compassion, and clarity. The call of the unseen also challenges the commercialized, rigid, or overly dogmatic standards of spirituality. It doesn't fit into closed systems because it is pure flow. It seeks expansion, not control. That's why many who hear it feel out of place in traditional settings, even those that are spiritual. The call doesn't ask for repetition, it asks for creation. It doesn't demand obedience, it demands truth. In this sense, being touched by this call is, above all, an invitation to radical authenticity. It's about being who you truly are, without masks, without illusions, and without fear. As more people answer this call, a new awareness begins to emerge within the collective. It's not a mass movement, but rather a silent symphony of awakened souls. Each one carries a piece of the whole. Together they form a new invisible order, not an institution, but a vibrational field. Not a structure, but a frequency. This order doesn't need to be created. It already exists. It simply needs to be recognized, and as it is recognized, it gains strength. Every conscious action, every compassionate gesture, every thought aligned with truth contributes to its expansion. This is how the invisible transforms the world, from the inside out, quietly yet powerfully. This role of the unseen reminds us that true teaching isn't about imposing ideas, but about inspiring others. A true master isn't someone who stands above, but rather someone who awakens the master within others. Genuine order isn't built on rules, but on resonance. And the real mission isn't to save the world, but to live so authentically that the world around us begins to remember what is real. This is the power of the call. It doesn't change the external world. It transforms the inner world of each individual. And when the inside changes, the outside inevitably follows. In the end, each of us will be touched by this calling at some point. It may come as a crisis, a moment of beauty, a loss, or an encounter. It will arrive when we are ready to see without our eyes, hear without our ears, and know without proof. And when it does come, we will recognize it, not because we've heard it before, but because we've always known it. This calling isn't new. It's as old as the soul. It's the reminder that we belong to something greater, something invisible and eternal, and that this something is calling us back home. There's a persistent illusion at the heart of the spiritual quest, the belief that the sacred resides in distant places, in hidden temples, in rare books, or in enlightened masters living in seclusion. The notion that awakening is always something external, something to be achieved, conquered, or revealed by someone with greater power or knowledge. However, those who have been truly touched by invisible forces understand that this separation is merely a superficial layer of the journey. The true temple lies within. The real order is not an institution, but a vibration. And the true master isn't someone to be followed, but a dormant aspect of ourselves, waiting to be recognized. The oldest, purest, and most transformative invisible order lives quietly at the core of every human being, latent, eternal, indestructible, awaiting the moment it is awakened by the inner guardian. This guardian doesn't wear cloaks or display symbols. He doesn't need titles, rituals, or formal oaths. He reveals himself in the silence of the mind, in the integrity of actions, and in the harmony between words and feelings. He represents that part of us that observes without judgment, that senses without overthinking, and that loves without possession. His awakening doesn't rely on external initiations, but rather on a deep and honest listening to one's own soul. When this guardian awakens, the need to belong to an order fades away, as it becomes clear that existence itself is a continuous initiatory process. Life transforms into the ritual, the body becomes the temple, and each conscious gesture serves as a vibrational seal that reaffirms our connection to the eternal. Those who awaken this inner guardian begin to walk through the world with a different presence. They don't stand out for their appearance, but for their energy. Surrounded by the crowd, they carry a unique silence. Amidst the noise, they are centers of peace. Their words are few, yet filled with depth. Their decisions are not driven by convenience, but by inner clarity. They become, without needing to announce it, points of connection to the invisible order. Each one of them is a living link in an unnamed lineage. They don't need to speak about it. The very vibration they emit reveals the presence of what cannot be explained. The discipline of these orders wasn't about moralism, it was about vibration. It was about tuning every aspect of life to the invisible principles that uphold the cosmos. The inner guardian understands that the secret lies not in mastering techniques, but in mastering oneself. True power doesn't come from accumulated knowledge, but from lived humility. Authority doesn't stem from force, but from vibrational coherence. That's why he doesn't seek to convince or confront. He simply lives. And in living, he transforms. His quiet existence creates cracks in the structures of ignorance around him. He is like a fire that warms without burning, like water that shapes without forcing. Awakening this guardian means realizing that everything you've ever sought has always been within you. The symbols you find outside are merely reflections of your inner truths. The masters serve as bridges, not destinations. The invisible order isn't something to be attained, rather, it's something to be unveiled within yourself. This revelation doesn't occur in grand spectacles, but in moments of deep clarity and simplicity. Sometimes it's a moment of silence in front of a breathtaking landscape, an instinctive act of compassion, a brave decision made in the name of your inner truth. It's in these moments that the guardian reveals itself, and its presence becomes undeniable. These guardians don't follow manuals. They respond to life with the wisdom of the moment. Each situation is an opportunity to embody the essence of the unseen. Every relationship serves as a mirror reflecting what needs to be transformed within. Each challenge is a chance to reaffirm their commitment to the journey. They don't seek recognition, as they already feel whole. They don't require proof, because they live in direct faith. Their connection isn't reliant on words, but on inner silence. And their growth isn't measured by diplomas, but by levels of presence and devotion. By living this way, the inner guardian becomes an extension of the invisible order in the world. He serves as a channel through which eternal principles can express themselves. Wherever he goes, he transforms the environment, not through imposition, but through resonance. He doesn't engage in debates. He radiates. He doesn't demand change. Instead, he inspires transformation simply by the strength of his example. His life stands as a silent testament to a broader reality, and his actions, no matter how subtle, are part of an invisible movement that spans the centuries, renewing itself with every awakened human being. There is no formal ceremony for entering this order. The entrance marks the moment when one chooses to live in alignment with their deepest truth. It's when you stop running from your own light. It's when you embrace the responsibility of living consciously. It's the realization that there's no turning back to a previous state of sleep. The awakened guardian understands that from this point on, every choice carries greater significance. And this significance is sacred because it embodies the weight of freedom. The freedom to no longer be swept away by unconsciousness, but to walk on your own path, holding on to the light even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. This inner order isn't solitary, even if the journey sometimes feels that way. It's connected to thousands, even millions, of other anonymous guardians spread across the globe, in diverse cultures, traditions, and realities. Some are aware, while others are just beginning to awaken. Yet they all share the same essence. They resonate on a common frequency, and even without knowing each other, they collaborate. They form a silent network that supports the planet in times of chaos. They may not be seen, but they are felt. They may not be named, but they are essential. They are the invisible backbone upon which hope rests. In awakening this guardian within, the seeker realizes there's no longer a need to chase after answers. They become the living question itself. Their life transforms into an expression of mystery. No longer reliant on certainties, they confidently inhabit the space between the known and the unknown. They surrender to the flow of existence, carrying the wisdom that everything has a purpose, even if it's not immediately clear. This surrender strengthens them, grounds them, and elevates them. They become a living temple, a living book, a living ritual. And so, without the need for labels or belonging to any external structure, the guardian walks, one among many, one with all. Understanding that true order is not crafted by human hands, but by the eternal rhythm of consciousness. Aware that even amidst the noise of the world, there exists a place of silence where everything is connected. And knowing that by living his truth, he honors the purest invisible order, the one that resides in every awakened heart, that beats in every being who chooses the light, that resonates in every soul that remembers who they truly are. Everything that is visible is destined to fade away. The mightiest empires have fallen. The grandest libraries have been reduced to ashes. The most glorious civilizations have turned to dust beneath the feet of the present. Human history is a vast graveyard of fragmented memories, imposing ruins, and names that no longer resonate as they once did. And yet, something endures. Something survives, not because it is inherently immortal, but because it has chosen not to cling to fleeting structures. It transcends time because it has never been bound by it. The invisible orders, those that opted not to record their existence, to promote themselves, or to conform to the linear flow of history, have triumphed over time precisely because they did not compete with it. They sought not eternity in stone, but in consciousness. And that is why they still live on, even when nothing remains of them to be seen with the eyes. What these orders understood from the very beginning is that anything fixed in the external world becomes vulnerable. Every form, no matter how sacred, eventually crumbles. Every word, no matter how powerful, will one day lose its meaning. Every doctrine, no matter how lofty, will eventually distort in the hands of mindless repetition. That's why they chose a different path, not one of form, but of frequency. Not one of physical permanence, but of vibrational continuity. A knowledge that is passed on not through scrolls, but through presence. A wisdom that endures not in monuments, but in awakened individuals. And these individuals become the new temples, the new books, the new anchors for the invisible. Time cannot destroy what lacks a fixed form. It is within this paradox that these orders have found their key to eternity. By becoming as flexible as water, as subtle as the wind, and as silent as the night, they have become indestructible. They have adapted to the changes of each era, endured persecution, and resisted oblivion not through force, but through wisdom. In every generation, they have awakened a select few. In every culture, they have discovered ways to express themselves without revealing their true nature. In every age, they have learned to read the signs and hide where the noise cannot reach. Thus, unlike institutions that must be seen to exist, these orders exist precisely because they do not need to be seen. Victory over time is not achieved through glory, but through quiet persistence. The ideas that have endured through the centuries are not necessarily the most celebrated, but rather those that have been truly lived. They have taken root in the human heart so deeply that they cannot be uprooted, even by millennia of forgetfulness. Love, compassion, inner truth, the quest for the divine. These principles resonate with the invisible orders of existence. They resurface cyclically in humanity, not as cultural legacies, but as spiritual memories. Because what is real is never truly forgotten. It simply lies dormant, waiting for a new awareness to help it bloom once more. There's also a choice involved in this eternity. The invisible orders don't impose themselves. They reveal themselves only to those who choose to see them. This choice isn't made with words, but through vibration. It's the decision to live in alignment with something greater, even without fully understanding what that is. It's the courage to embrace silence when the world is shouting. It's the commitment to truth when everything around you resonates with falsehood. This choice is what activates the connection to the eternal. There's no initiation more powerful than living in harmony with your essence. Those who make this choice become part of the order, regardless of where they are, what culture they come from, or the time in which they live. These orders understood that the language of time is change. That's why they never clung to the permanence of forms. The same truth can be expressed in 1,000 ways, adapted to countless contexts, and told through myriad stories. What truly matters isn't the appearance of the message, but the spirit that drives it. Thus, the wisdom of the invisible orders often found refuge in legends, children's tales, the metaphors of poets, and the insights of artists. The invisible speaks through all means, and therefore cannot be silenced. Even when all records are lost, it resurfaces, because its source lies not in history, but in living consciousness. Time may erode libraries, but it cannot erase what has been lived intensely. True eternity lies in experience. When someone embraces a profound truth, it imprints itself on the invisible realm of the human spirit. There, it remains, like a spark waiting to be reignited. For centuries, invisible forces have operated under this principle. They understood that nurturing an initiate was far more significant than writing a book, that awakening a consciousness was more impactful than building a cathedral, and that transmitting a vibration was safer than leaving behind a document. This is why their legacy continues to spread. It resonates within every individual who chooses to live authentically. The immortality that these orders have achieved is not like that of the gods in mythology. It's the kind of immortality that endures even when everything else changes. They have become woven into the very fabric of humanity. They are embedded in our highest values, our noblest impulses, and our bravest decisions. They are present whenever someone chooses light in the midst of darkness, whenever someone listens to their intuition instead of giving in to fear, each time a soul awakens from the slumber of ignorance and decides to remember who they truly are. That's when the order reveals itself, not as an external entity, but as an inner presence. And for that reason, even when it goes unseen, it is still deeply felt. This choice for vibrational eternity is also a call to humility. The invisible orders never sought credit. They never wanted their names to be celebrated. They understood that ego can corrupt even the best intentions. That's why they preferred anonymity. They knew that the message matters more than the messenger, that frequency is more significant than fame, and that quiet coherence is more powerful than any speech. This is why their fruits are so pure. They were nurtured away from the spotlight, watered with silence, and harvested by those who could see the invisible in the ordinary. In an age characterized by speed, information overload, and superficiality, the message of these orders is radical. Return to what truly matters. Return to silence. Return to a direct connection with the mystery. It's about relearning how to listen to the unspoken, to perceive the formless, and to trust in what cannot be explained. This is the new initiation, not held in secret rooms, but in the fabric of everyday life. It's not guided by external masters, but by one's own awakened presence. Those who heed this call become the torchbearers of the order, not through oaths, but through resonance, not through titles, but through their very being. Time tries to erase everything fragile, but the invisible is not fragile. It is subtle, which is something entirely different. Its strength lies precisely in its delicacy, in the way it touches without hurting, in the way it transforms without overwhelming, in the way it endures even when everything else changes. And so, at the end of all ages, it will still be there, just as it was in the beginning, just as it is now, just as it will be when the last document is burned and the last statue falls. Because what truly resonates doesn't need guarantees. It is eternal by choice. And that choice is made in silence, in the heart, in the moment. Thus, this journey concludes by unveiling the deepest paradox. The invisible order never needed to exist formally to exist eternally. Its temple is consciousness. Its altar is the present moment. Its scripture is life itself, and its eternity is not bound by time, for it exists beyond it. Those who understand this no longer need to seek, they simply need to live, with presence, with integrity, with the serenity of one who recognizes the invisible as the source of all that is real, because the invisible, when truly lived, becomes the only thing that can never die. Mind Unfettered. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt touched by something invisible, unable to explain how or why? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might be the whisper someone needs to awaken. Together, we are cultivating a field of living wisdom here, and each thoughtful comment is a spark that ignites more light on this shared journey. If you thought this deep dive was something, wait until you uncover what Jesus truly left for those with eyes to see. In the next video, already on your screen, I unveil a long-forgotten map, the Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. Click now and continue this journey with an awakened heart. The light is just beginning to unfold. See you there, Mind Unfettered.